She once had it all. Then her only daughter, the child she had sacrificed her entire life to raise, relegated her to a cold, dreary laundry room, as if she were something to be hidden away. But what Madison didn't know would change everything forever. If you're watching this story, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment with the name of the city or country you're watching from, so I can see just how far my stories have traveled. Don't miss out. The upcoming stories are even more shocking. Airport smelled like floor wax and recycled air, the kind of smell that gets into your clothes and stays there long after you've left. I remember standing at the baggage claim with 2 suitcases and a carry-on bag that had a broken zipper held shut with a rubber band I'd found at the bottom of my purse. 2 suitcases. That was everything. 68 years of living, and I had managed to pack it all into 2 pieces of luggage that didn't even match. I kept telling myself it was fine. I kept saying, inside my head, over and over like a prayer. I wasn't sure I believed anymore. It's fine, Evelyn. It's going to be fine. My name is Evelyn Carter, and 6 months ago, I lost almost everything I had built in the visible part of my life, the house in Tucson, that Robert and I had paid off together, the car I'd driven for 11 years, the little pottery studio in the garage, where I spent Sunday mornings when the world got too loud. A bad series of events, the kind that pile up on a person when they're already grieving. Robert had been gone for 3 years by then. 3 years of managing on my own, of learning to sleep in the middle of a king-size bed, because the edges felt too much like absence. And then the market, the medical bills from my own health scare, and one contractor who turned out to be a thief in a hard hat, it all collapsed faster than I could brace for. But here is what I need you to understand before anything else. I was not as broken as I looked. I just looked very, very broken. Madison saw me before I saw her. She came pushing through the crowd near the sliding doors, and when I turned and found her face, she was already crying. Not the quiet, dignified kind of crying, the ugly kind, with her mouth pulling sideways and her eyes going red almost immediately. She threw her arms around me and held on so tight I could feel her heartbeat against my collarbone. She kept saying, "Just that, Mom." I held her back. I breathed in the smell of her hair. She still used the same vanilla shampoo she'd bought since college, and I felt something in my chest unlock that I hadn't realized had been bolted shut. She was 41 years old, my daughter, a grown woman with her own mortgage and her own arguments and her own complicated life. But in that moment, in the arrivals hall of Portland International Airport, she was just my girl. "I'm okay," I told her, even though my back was aching from the flight and my hands were shaking a little from low blood sugar because I'd been too anxious to eat anything on the plane. "You don't have to be okay," she said. She pulled back and looked at my face, holding my cheeks in both her palms. "You're home now. You're with me. Home." That was the word she used. I didn't correct her. Madison's husband, Derek Hale, was waiting at the curb with the engine running and the hazard lights blinking. He was a decent-looking man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that photographed well, but didn't give much away in person. He climbed out when he saw us coming and reached for my larger suitcase without being asked, which I appreciated. "Evelyn," he said, nodding once. "Good to have you. Not glad, not happy, just good to have you." The way you'd say it about a piece of furniture being delivered. But I was tired and I was grateful, and I told myself I was reading too much into it. People have their own ways of expressing warmth. Derek's way was just quieter than Madison's. That's what I told myself. The drive to their house took 40 minutes through wet, gray Portland streets. I sat in the back seat and watched the city go by through rain-streaked windows and listened to Madison talk about the neighborhood, about her new job with the marketing firm, about their dog Biscuit, who had anxiety and sometimes chewed the baseboards when left alone too long. She talked the way she always did when she was nervous, filling every silence before it had a chance to settle. Derek drove and said almost nothing. I watched the back of his head and tried to get a read on him. I had never entirely figured Derek out in the years since Madison brought him home. He was financially responsible, I knew that much, and he worked long hours in some kind of logistics management role that I had never fully understood despite having it explained to me twice. He wasn't unkind to Madison, as far as I could tell. But there was something careful about him, something that always felt like he was running a calculation just below the surface of his expressions. I told myself, give him time. You're coming into his house. Of course it's an adjustment. I was always telling myself things like that. I had a talent for it. The house was a two-story craftsman in a neighborhood that had clearly been rehabbed in the last decade, the kind of block where all the houses looked slightly too clean, too renovated, too proud of their new windows. Madison's and Derek's place had a covered porch and window boxes with dead flowers in them from the summer that nobody had cleared out yet. Inside, it was nicer than I expected. Madison's had a good eye, she always had. Warm colors, layered rugs, a kitchen with a long island where copper-bottomed pots hung from a ceiling rack. It looked like a home. It felt like one, for about the first 12 minutes. Then Madison showed me to my room, or what she called my room. It was off the back hallway, past the kitchen, past the water heater closet. A laundry room. Not a converted one, not a cleverly repurposed one with a fresh coat of paint and a daybed tucked in the corner. A laundry room. There was a stackable washer-dryer unit against one wall, shelves of detergent and fabric softener, and a bottle of bleach on the other, and in between, pushed against the interior wall, with barely enough space to walk around it, was a folding cot with a fitted sheet on it. A folding cot. I stood in the doorway and didn't say anything for a moment. I know it's not ideal, Madison said quickly, and her voice had that particular quality slightly too fast, slightly too high that told me she'd rehearsed this. The guest room has Derek's office equipment in it, right now. He's been working from home so much since the restructuring at his company, and we haven't had time to sort through everything. Temporary. Just until we figure out a better setup. Of course, I said. The words came out of me automatically. 68 years of being a woman who smoothed things over had made that reflex nearly involuntary. There's a space heater in the closet, she added. The room gets a little cold at night because it shares a wall with the garage, but the space heater works great. I nodded. I looked at the folding cot. I looked at the shelf of laundry supplies. It's fine, I said. I'm just glad to be here. And part of me meant it. The part that was exhausted and lost and didn't have anywhere else to go. That part meant it completely. The part that had built something for herself in secret, the part that had watched and waited and learned, that part was already paying very close attention. The first week, I told myself it was an adjustment period. That's normal. Moving in with family is a disruption for everyone involved, and discomfort at the beginning doesn't mean anything is wrong. I had lived alone for 3 years. They had lived without me for longer than that. These things take time. So I made myself useful. I woke up early. I've always been an early riser, habit from decades of it, and I made coffee before anyone else was up. I learned where Madison kept everything in her kitchen, and I made breakfast most mornings. Eggs, sometimes oatmeal, toast with the good bread from the bakery. 2 blocks over that I discovered on my 3rd day when I took a long walk, because I needed to get out of that laundry room and breathe air that didn't smell like dryer sheets. Cleaned. Not in an obvious performing way, just quietly, the way I'd always kept a home. Wiping down the counters after meals, running a load of dishes before bed, picking up Biscuit's toys from the hallway so nobody tripped on them. Small things. Invisible things. The kind of work that only becomes visible when it stops getting done. Madison noticed occasionally. "Mom, you don't have to do all this," she'd say, coming into the kitchen to find me washing the pan she'd left soaking. But she'd say it while reaching for the coffee I'd already made. And she never actually stopped me. Derek noticed too. In his way, I caught him looking at the clean stovetop once, with an expression I couldn't name. Something between approval and something else. Something assessing. The second week, things shifted. Started small. Madison mentioned at dinner one evening that the grocery bill had gone up since I arrived, and said it in a way that wasn't quite a joke. Derek said nothing, but he glanced at me. I offered to contribute to the household expenses. I had a small amount set aside in a checking account that I kept separate from everything else, walking around money. Nothing significant, and Madison waved the suggestion off immediately. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "Your family." But the way she said it, that flat, slightly impatient way, it didn't sound like generosity. It sounded like someone closing a door. 3 days later, I was in the kitchen, starting dinner, when Madison came home from work in a mood I recognized from the time she was 16, and furious at a teacher who'd given her a B on a paper she thought deserved an A. Her jaw set tight, her movements clipped and efficient, not looking at me directly. "Rough day?" I asked carefully. "It's fine." She opened the refrigerator and stared into it without taking anything out. "You want to talk about—" I said, "It's fine, Mom." I went back to chopping the onions. A few minutes passed. "Then, did you use the good olive oil? The one on the second shelf?" "I used the one that was out. Derek's. That was specifically for—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "You know what? Forget it. It doesn't matter." It did matter. She made that clear without saying so. And I felt it, that small, precise sting of being in a space where you are tolerated rather than welcomed, where every move you make has the potential to be the wrong one. I finished making dinner. I set the table. I ate with them in near silence, and then I washed the dishes and went back to my room, my laundry room, and sat on the edge of the folding cot in the dark for a while before I turned on the space heater. The space heater had a rattle in it. It took about 40 minutes to warm the small room to something approaching comfortable. The smell of the detergent on the shelves never fully went away, no matter how many times I moved the bottles to the far corner. I lay down on that cot and stared at the ceiling. Fine, I thought. This is where you are. Pay attention. By the end of the third week, the dynamic had crystallized into something I could no longer pretend not to see. Madison did not speak to me the way a daughter speaks to her mother. She spoke to me the way a person speaks to someone they feel responsible for but resent. There's a particular quality to that kind of speech, a certain flatness, a kind of studied patience that has irritation running underneath it like a current under ice. I knew it because I had spent decades watching people and listening to the spaces between what they said and what they meant. It had been useful to me in ways I had never told anyone. Derek spoke to me even less. He had started addressing me in a way that I can only describe as past me, directing his comments at Madison while I was standing right there, as though I were a piece of furniture he'd learned to navigate around. One morning I asked him directly whether he'd prefer. I eat breakfast before they came downstairs, just trying to understand the rhythms of the household, trying not to be intrusive, and he looked at me with something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite contempt and said, "Whatever works for you, Evelyn." The name. Not Evelyn. Do whatever you're comfortable with. Just Evelyn. Flat and final, the way you'd address someone you were done thinking about. Their 12-year-old son, Tyler, was the only one who treated me like a person. He liked to sit with me in the kitchen after school and tell me about his video games in exhaustive, loving detail, and I listened to every word and asked questions because I found I genuinely wanted to understand what he cared about. He called me Grandma Ev, and once unprompted, told me that I made better scrambled eggs than his mom. I held on to that. It was on a Thursday morning that I understood something had shifted in a way that could not be undone. I had been in the laundry room with the door cracked, reading a paperback I'd picked up from a box at the end of someone's driveway on one of my walks, when I heard Madison and Derek talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but not low enough. The hallway carried sound in a way they probably hadn't thought about. "Still don't know exactly what's in the trust," Derek was saying. "She's not going to volunteer it. I found the documents, Derek. I'm telling you, she has more than she's letting on. Way more. How much more are we talking? I don't know the exact number. But the property listings alone, if I'm reading it right." Madison's voice dropped further. I strained to hear. "It's significant. Like life-changing significant." Pause. "Then Derek, does she know you found them?" "No." I put everything back exactly where it was. Another pause. "Okay," Derek said. His voice had changed. Something had come into it that hadn't been there before. "Okay, so we need to think about this carefully." I lay very still on the folding cot. The space heater rattled in the corner. The room smelled like lavender fabric softener and something colder underneath. I stared at the underside of the shelf above me, the one with the bleach and the dryer sheets, and the little lost button that had been sitting there since before I arrived that nobody had ever bothered to pick up. And I thought, there it is. I had wondered how long it would take. I had been waiting, without letting myself admit I was waiting, to see what my daughter would do when she found out. Because I had known, from the moment I decided to come here, that there was a chance she would find out. I hadn't hidden everything. I had left just enough visible to see what would happen when it was seen. This was the moment I had been dreading. This was also, in a way I couldn't yet explain, the moment I had been preparing for. I closed my paperback. I set it down on the cot beside me. Outside the small high window of the laundry room, the Portland rain had started up again, tapping against the glass in an irregular rhythm that sounded almost like someone knocking, patiently waiting to be let in. I was 68 years old. I had buried a husband. I had survived things that I had never told my daughter about. I had built something real and lasting in the quiet margins of a life that everyone around me had believed they understood completely. I was not finished, not even close. The rain didn't stop that Thursday. Kept going through the afternoon and into the evening, the kind of steady Pacific Northwest rain that doesn't announce itself with thunder or wind, it just arrives and stays, like an unwelcome thought you can't shake loose. I lay on that folding cot for a long time, after Madison and Derek's voices went quiet in the kitchen, staring at the ceiling and listening to the drops hit the small window above the washing machine, and I did something I hadn't let myself do in a very long time. I let myself remember how all of this started. Not the part where I lost the house in Tucson. Not the contractor or the medical bills, or the slow financial unraveling that had brought me to this laundry room in Portland with two mismatched suitcases. I mean further back than that. I mean the beginning of the part of my life that nobody knew about. Not Madison, not Robert when he was alive, not a single person I had ever called a friend. I need to tell you something about myself that I am not entirely proud of, and also something I would do again without hesitation. I am not, and have never been, the woman that most people believed they were looking at. When Robert and I got married in 1981, I was 23 years old and working as a bookkeeper for a small manufacturing company in Columbus, Ohio. Robert was an electrician, a good one, steady and careful with money in the way that people who grew up without it tend to be. We were not wealthy. We were not even comfortable for the first several years. We were the kind of young couple who checks the account balance before going out to dinner and splits the difference on everything, right down to the cable bill. But I had a mind for numbers that went beyond bookkeeping. I had always known this. Even as a girl, I could look at a column of figures and see patterns in them, the way other people saw shapes in clouds naturally, without effort, almost involuntarily. My mother had called it a gift and told me not to talk about it too much, because people didn't like women who were too sharp about money. My mother was a practical woman who had survived difficult things by staying quiet, and I had learned from her example in more ways than I'd ever intended. When Madison was 4 years old, I started reading. Not novels I'd always read those, but financial texts, investment theory, market analysis. I borrowed books from the library and read them after Madison went to sleep and before Robert got home from his late jobs. I opened a small brokerage account with $800 that I had saved in the space of 8 months by cutting grocery costs in ways Robert never noticed: store brands, seasonal produce, cooking from scratch things that most people bought pre-made. $800. That was where it started. Robert knew about the account in the beginning. He thought it was sweet, I think, his wife playing at investing. He didn't take it seriously, and I didn't correct his impression. I just kept reading and kept learning and kept making decisions that, over time, turned out to be right far more often than they were wrong. By the time Madison was 12, the account had grown to something that surprised even me. That was when I stopped telling Robert about it. I want to be clear. I did not hide the money to deceive my husband. I hid it because I had learned something important about human nature, something I had watched play out in other families around us, in neighbors and relatives and coworkers, which was this: money changes the way people treat each other. It changes the way people see themselves in relation to each other. It introduces a kind of arithmetic into relationships that wasn't there before, and once it's there, it is almost impossible to remove. Robert was a proud man, a good man, but proud in the particular way that men of his generation sometimes were proud, in a way that was connected to being the provider, to being the one who made things stable. If he had known the full extent of what I was building, quietly, in accounts he never looked at, it would have changed something between us. I was almost certain of it, and I loved what we had too much to risk it, so I kept it separate. I established a private trust. Evelyn worked with a very careful attorney named Harold Briggs, who had the kind of discretion that money, properly applied, tends to purchase, and I built inside that trust a portfolio that grew steadily over 2.5 decades. Properties, index funds, a few private business investments that paid out far better than I had any right to expect. I was not reckless. I was never reckless. Recklessness is what happens when people confuse confidence with certainty, and I had learned early that those are not the same thing. By the time Robert died, the trust was worth something that I have never said out loud to anyone, and I do not intend to say it out loud now. What I will say is that it was enough, more than enough. Enough that the financial catastrophe that had apparently stripped me of everything the Tucson house, the car, the pottery studio was, in the truest sense, the visible layer of a much larger picture. I had lost the surface. The foundation was entirely intact, and I had come to Portland with 2 mismatched suitcases and a broken zippered carry-on, and I had let my daughter believe. I was a woman who had lost everything, because I needed to know something that I could not have found out any other way. I needed to know what she would do. I lay on that cot listening to the rain, and I thought about Madison at 7 years old, the way she used to crawl into my lap when she was scared and press her face against my neck, and just breathe until whatever had frightened her loosened its grip. I thought about Madison at 17, standing in our kitchen in Columbus, screaming at me that I didn't understand her and that she couldn't wait to get out of this house, and how I had stood there and let her scream because I understood that she needed to, and that loving sometimes means being the wall they throw themselves against when they don't know what else to do. I thought about all the ways I had loved her that she had never seen and never known about, because the most important kinds of love are almost always invisible. And then I thought about what she had said to Derek in the kitchen. She has more than she's letting on, way more, life-changing, significant, and the particular quality of Derek's voice when he said, "Okay, we need to think about this carefully." That flat, recalibrating quality, the voice of a man running numbers. I thought, well, now you know. But knowing a thing and knowing what to do with what you know are entirely different problems, and I was not ready to act yet. So I kept still. I kept watching. I made myself as small and as quiet and as unthreatening as I had been for the past 3 weeks, and I let them believe that what they saw was all there was to see. I was very good at that. The change in Matheson happened gradually enough that I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching for it. But I was watching, and so I saw it unfold in real time, this careful, incremental shift in the way she treated me that was more disturbing, in its way, than outright cruelty would have been. She started being nicer, not warm, not the way she'd been at the airport, not the tears and the vanilla shampoo and the "you're home now." Something more calculated than that, a kind of managed pleasantness, the social equivalent of a coat of fresh paint over a wall that hasn't been repaired. She started asking me questions about my past, about Robert, about the early years of our marriage. She would sit across from me at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and lean forward with what looked like interest. And I would answer her questions carefully, giving her just enough to make the conversation feel real without telling her anything that mattered. "You never really talked about money stuff when I was growing up," she said one evening. It was said casually, the way you'd comment on the weather. But her hands were wrapped around her mug a little tighter than usual. "We didn't have much to talk about," I said, "but you always seemed to know what you were doing. Like, even when things were tight, you were always calm about it." "I worried about it plenty," I said. "I just didn't see the use in worrying out loud." She nodded, looking into her mug. "Then Dad never mentioned any, I don't know, investments or anything. Did he have things set up somewhere? Like a counselor?" "Your father was an electrician," I said. "He had a pension and a savings account, and he was very responsible about both of them. Everything went to estate, Madison. You know that." She looked up at me then, quick, searching, and I looked back at her steadily, the way I always had, the way that made people feel, without quite knowing why, that they were not going to find what they were looking for in my expression. "Right," she said. "Of course." She took a sip of her tea. The conversation moved on to Tyler's upcoming school project. But something had shifted in the room, fine as a hair, and we both felt it, even if only I understood what it meant. Derek began paying attention to me in a way he hadn't before. And unlike Madison, he wasn't subtle about it. He started appearing in rooms where I was the kitchen in the morning, the living room in the evening, and finding reasons to talk. Not real conversation. Exploratory conversation. The kind where the actual questions are never the ones being asked. "So Evelyn," he said one Saturday morning, standing at the counter with his coffee while I was putting away the breakfast dishes, "you spent a lot of years in Tucson. What'd you do out there mostly, after Robert passed?" "I kept busy," I said. "Pottery. Reading. I had a garden." "But you were, day to day, financially, you were managing okay? Before the situation with the house?" I paused just a half second before answering. just enough to make the pause feel like thought rather than calculation. I managed, I said. It wasn't always easy, but I managed. He nodded, drank his coffee. Robert must have had pretty good life insurance, at least. Being in a trade like that, it helped for a while. For a while, he repeated. And I could hear him turning the phrase over, testing the edges of it. Derek, I said, very pleasantly, do you need help with something specific? Or are you just keeping me company? The question caught him slightly off guard, I saw it, in the brief tightening around his eyes. He smiled, the kind of smile that's a reflex rather than a feeling. Just making conversation, he said. I said, and went back to the dishes. But I noticed that after that morning, he changed tactics. He stopped asking direct questions and started doing something more sophisticated. He started including me. Dinner conversations that had previously flowed around me, as though I were a piece of furniture, suddenly incorporated me, invited my opinions, asked what I thought about things. He laughed at something I said. One evening genuinely laughed, or what sounded genuine, and Madison looked at him with a flicker of something in her face that I recognized as relief. They were not cruel people, I told myself. They were frightened, financially anxious people who had found themselves presented with what they believed might be a solution to their anxiety, and they were circling it the way anyone who's been hungry long enough circles, something that looks like food. I understood it. Understanding something is not the same as accepting it. It was Madison who let me see the full shape of things, and she did it by accident. About 5 weeks into my stay, she had a phone call that she took in the bedroom, with the door shut, which she never did normally. Madison was the kind of person who wandered the whole house while she talked on the phone, drifting from kitchen to living room to hallway without thinking about it. The closed door meant the call was about something she didn't want overheard. I wasn't trying to listen, but I was in the hallway returning a basket of folded laundry to the closet, my contribution, since I was sleeping in the room where the laundry lived, and I heard enough. Harold Briggs is the attorney, she was saying. He's based in Columbus. I found his name on some of the documents. A pause while whoever was on the other end responded. I know. But if she set up a trust structure like this, there has to be a way to find out what's in it. I'm not trying to do anything wrong. I'm just trying to understand what she actually has. Another pause. Because she's my mother, and everything she has should eventually. She stopped, lowered her voice. Look, can you just find out if the trust has any beneficiary designations or not? That's all I'm asking. I stood in the hallway with the laundry basket in my hands, and I felt something move through me that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. It was more precise than either of those things. It was the particular feeling of having suspected something, and then having it confirmed, the cold, clarifying feeling of a thing becoming certain. She was asking someone, a lawyer, from the sound of it, maybe a financial advisor, to investigate my trust, to find out what I had and whether she stood to inherit it. Harold Briggs, my attorney, was the most discreet man I had ever known. Madison would find nothing through him. I was absolutely sure of that. But the fact that she was looking, the fact that she had found his name in the documents she'd admitted to Derek she had gone through, that told me everything about where her head was. I went back to the laundry room. I set the basket down. I sat on the cot. The space heater rattled. The bleach on the shelf smelled sharp and clean. And I started, quietly and methodically, to think about what came next. I should tell you about the documents she found, because you deserve to understand what Madison was actually looking at when she went through my things. I had brought with me, in the carry-on with the broken zipper, a manila folder that contained a small selection of papers. Not the full picture, not anything close to the full picture, but a carefully chosen sample of things that I had selected before I left Tucson. Property listing, a trust summary with key details present and key details absent. A letter from Harold on his letterhead, referencing the trust without specifying its contents. I had left the folder in my carry-on in a way that was not quite hidden. I want to be honest with you about this, because it is the part of myself that I find most difficult to explain without sounding calculating or cold, and I am neither of those things, or at least I have never wanted to be. I had not come to Portland intending to test my daughter. I want you to believe that. I had come because I had nowhere else to go that made practical sense, and because she was my daughter, and because part of me, the part that had always loved her, the part that remembered her face pressed against my neck when she was 7, genuinely wanted to believe that she had grown into someone who could be trusted. But I had also lived 68 years, and I had learned across those 68 years that the moments when you most want to believe something are exactly the moments when you need to be most careful. So yes, the folder was slightly findable. Not obviously, not like a trap, but findable, in the way that things are findable by someone who is actively looking. And Madison had been actively looking. What she found told her that her mother had significant assets. What it didn't tell her, what she had no way of knowing, was the full extent of them, or the specific structures I had built around them, or the fact that I had been watching from the beginning, and that nothing she and Derek had said in this house had gone unnoticed. She thought she had found the secret. She had found the edge of it, the perimeter fence. The thing itself was still entirely invisible to her. The shift in how they treated me now that they believed they understood my hidden value was one of the more instructive things I had witnessed in recent memory, and I had witnessed a fair number of instructive things. Madison stopped assigning me household chores in the oblique way she had been by making loaded comments about the condition of the kitchen, or mentioning that she was exhausted and had so much to do. Instead, she started asking directly, but in a tone that tried to sound collaborative rather than demanding. "Mom, do you mind handling dinner tonight? You know I have that presentation tomorrow." Or, "Could you do a grocery run? I'll give you the card." The grocery card was a new development. For the first 5 weeks, I had been buying my own incidentals out of my checking account. Now she offered the card, and when I used it, she looked at the receipt in a way that was performative. See how generous we are. See how we provide for her. Derek started asking for my opinion about things. Financial things. He did it casually, slipping it into conversation. "Hey, do you think it makes more sense to pay down the home equity line or keep putting that into the market right now? You seem like you'd know about this stuff." I gave him careful, accurate, utterly generic answers that he could have found in any personal finance column, and he received them as though they were insights. The quality of what I was receiving in return did not change. I was still sleeping in the laundry room. The cot was still the cot. The space heater still rattled. Nobody suggested moving Derek's office equipment out of the guest room. Nobody offered me a drawer in the bathroom cabinet, which I had been keeping my toiletries out of, in a small plastic bag, because there was nowhere else to put them. They wanted access to what they believed I had. They did not want to actually share their home with me. I noticed all of it. I filed all of it. And I kept making breakfast and wiping down counters and reading my library books and sitting with Tyler after school while he explained game mechanics that I pretended to be more confused about than I was, because he was 12 in earnest, and he deserved to feel like an expert at something. And none of what was happening between the adults in this house was his fault. The breaking point that led to everything coming apart was not the big confrontation you might expect. It rarely is in real life. In real life, the thing that finally makes you stop swallowing everything you've been swallowing is usually something small and stupid, something so obviously beneath the weight of all the things you've endured, that the disproportionate response surprises even you. For me, it was a broken planter. There was a ceramic planter on the back porch, a terracotta pot, maybe 12 inches wide, that had held a dead fern all autumn. It had been sitting there neglected since well before I arrived. One morning in my 6th week at the house, I tripped on the step coming in from the backyard and knocked into the porch railing, which knocked into the little shelf that held the planter, and the planter fell off the shelf and cracked into 3 pieces on the porch boards. I felt terrible about it. It was an accident, a completely ordinary accident of the kind that happens to everyone. But I felt terrible because I understood that in this house, accidents that I caused had a different weight than other accidents. I gathered the pieces and left them on the porch because I wasn't sure what to do with them, and I thought I should tell Madison before throwing anything away, in case the pot had sentimental value. That evening, Madison saw the pieces. "What happened?" she asked, coming into the kitchen where I was starting dinner. "I knocked it off the shelf by accident this morning," I said. "I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if it meant something to you, so I kept the pieces. I can replace it if you—" "That was my grandmother's," Madison said. The statement dropped into the room and sat there. I looked at her. I knew because I had known Madison's grandmothers that this was not true. Both of her grandmothers had been gone for over 20 years. Neither of them had been women who owned terracotta planters. Pot was mass-produced. I could see the manufacturer's stamp on one of the broken pieces. But I didn't say any of that. I'm truly sorry, I said. If it can be repaired. Things like that can't be repaired, Madison said. Her voice had that quality again, that flat, tight quality that I had learned to brace for. Once they're broken, they're broken. It was an accident. Everything is an accident with you. She opened the refrigerator, not looking at me. You used the wrong olive oil. It's an accident. You break things that can't be replaced. It's an accident. I'm starting to think I need to just clear out a section of the house and put a velvet rope around it. I stood at the stove. The burner was on under an empty pan, and I reached over and turned it off, very deliberately, because I needed to do something with my hands. Madison, I said quietly, I have been doing everything I can to be helpful and to stay out of your way. I have been sleeping in a laundry room for 6 weeks. I have been cooking and cleaning, and nobody asked you to cook and clean, she snapped. That's what you do. You just take over and do things, and then I'm supposed to be grateful. The injustice of that was so clean and so complete that for a moment I actually couldn't speak. You moved into my house, she continued, and now there was something under the flatness, something that had been building for weeks and had found a small, stupid crack to leak through. You moved into my house, and you don't pay anything toward the bills, and you use our things, and you leave your stuff all over the kitchen counter. And I'm trying to be patient, Mom. I'm really trying. But sometimes I feel like you should be a little more grateful for even having a place to sleep. Grateful. She had said it. The thing that had been hanging in the air for 6 weeks, unspoken, sitting in every look Derek gave me and every loaded comment Madison made. She had finally said it out loud. Be grateful for having a place to sleep. The place being, to be precise, the laundry room, the folding cot, the rattling space heater, the shelf of bleach. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. I looked at her and I saw, with a sudden and crystalline clarity, who she had become in the space between the girl who pressed her face against my neck when she was frightened, and the woman standing in this kitchen telling me to be grateful for the laundry room. I saw someone I didn't entirely recognize. I also saw someone who was not entirely to blame, someone who had grown up watching a mother model a particular kind of invisible sacrifice, who had never been taught to see that sacrifice clearly, and who had somehow developed in its absence not gratitude but a sense of entitlement so bone deep she probably couldn't feel it herself. That understanding did not make what she had said acceptable, but it made it legible. And I was done, finally, completely done, trying to decode it quietly from a folding cot. I didn't say anything right then. I am aware that probably surprises you. You're waiting for the confrontation, and it's coming, but not that night. Not over a broken planter and a dinner that hadn't been started yet. Because I had spent 68 years learning that the timing of when you speak is as important as what you say. And I was not going to waste what I had to say on a moment that was too small to hold it. I finished making dinner. I set the table. I washed the dishes. I went to the laundry room and sat on the folding cot, and I listened to the space heater rattle in the corner, and I made my decision. Not the decision to leave, I had made that one already, in the quiet part of my mind, without entirely admitting it to myself. The decision about how to leave. The decision about what to say before I did, and to whom, and in what room, and with what evidence in my hands. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan, and I took out my phone, and I sent a message to Harold Briggs. 3 sentences. Then I put the phone back in my pocket, and I lay down on the cot, and I stared at the ceiling, and I was, despite everything, despite the broken planter and the be grateful and the 6 weeks of laundry room, living almost entirely calm. Because I had been waiting for this moment for 68 years, in one form or another. The moment when someone who believed they had sized me up completely would find out that they had barely scratched the surface. The rain had stopped outside, finally. The window above the washing machine showed a strip of dark sky with one visible star in it, faint and unhurried, going exactly nowhere, just burning steadily in its own place. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I thought. We do this tomorrow. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was frightened, I was past frightened, had moved through it and out the other side, into something that felt more like the flat gray calm that comes after a long storm has finally broken. I lay on the folding cot with my eyes open, and I went through everything in my head the way I used to go through financial projections, before a major decision, methodically, without sentiment. testing each piece against the others to make sure nothing would collapse under pressure. Harold had responded to my 3-sentence message within 20 minutes, which told me he'd been expecting something like this. Harold Briggs had been my attorney for 22 years, and in that time he had learned to read my silences as fluently as my words. His response was brief. Understood. Everything is in order on this end. Say the word. I had not yet said the word. I was going to say it in person in that kitchen, at a time of my choosing. I got up at 5:30, earlier than usual. The house was completely quiet. Derek didn't stir until 7. Madison until 7:30, Tyler until the last possible moment before the school bus came. I had the whole ground floor to myself for nearly 2 hours, and I used them deliberately. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone, and I did something I had not done. In the 6 weeks I had been in this house, I pulled up the full account summary on the private portal that Harold maintained for me, and I looked at the numbers directly, without flinching. The way you look at your own reflection when you need to remind yourself of what's actually there. I looked at it for a long time. Then I closed the portal, put my phone face down on the table, and drank my coffee in the early morning quiet while the refrigerator hummed and Biscuit snored on his dog bed in the corner, and the whole house breathed around me, still and unaware. I was thinking about what Madison had said. Be grateful for having a place to sleep. I had been turning those words over since the night before, examining them from different angles, the way you'd examine a stone you found on the ground, not beautiful, not valuable, telling you something about the landscape if you looked at it right. What it told me, ultimately, was this: my daughter had crossed a line she didn't know existed. She had said the thing that made the next part not just justified, but necessary. Because here is something I believe, and have believed for most of my adult life: there is a cost to silence. People talk about silence as though it's always the safe choice, always the dignified one, always the high road. But silence has a price, and the people who pay it most often are the ones who are most willing to absorb discomfort on behalf of others. I had been absorbing for 6 weeks. I had absorbed the laundry room and the grocery cart, and the way Derek looked past me, and the way Madison's voice went flat and impatient when she spoke to me. I had absorbed all of it because I was watching and waiting, and because I still, even then, even knowing what I knew, had a piece of me that hoped I was wrong about what I was seeing. The broken planter and the be grateful had closed that last remaining space. I wasn't wrong. I had never been wrong, and now I was done absorbing. Harold arrived at 11:15. I had asked him to come to the house. I had given him the address and told him 11 o'clock, and he had texted back that he'd be there at 11:15 because he had a parking situation to manage, which was Harold being. Harold, even after 22 years, he communicated with the precision of a man who billed in 6-minute increments. He was 71, silver-haired, with a kind of face that looked like it had been carved for the specific purpose of projecting trustworthiness, and he drove a sensible gray sedan that he'd owned for 11 years because he believed in not spending money on things that didn't produce returns. I had not told Madison or Derek that he was coming. They were both home. It was a Saturday. Madison was doing something in the upstairs office, and Derek was watching something on television in the living room with the volume low, the way he did on weekend mornings when he was pretending to relax, but not quite managing it. Tyler was at a friend's house. I was grateful for that. When the doorbell rang, I answered it. Before Derek had a chance to get up from the couch, Harold stepped inside with his briefcase. He still carried a briefcase, had always carried one, maintained that laptops made people sloppy about what they brought to meetings, and he took in the house with a single quiet sweep of his eyes. He looked at me. I looked back. "Evelyn," he said. "Thank you for coming, Harold," I said. "Come into the kitchen." Derek had appeared in the doorway between the living room and the hall. He was looking at Harold with the careful, measuring look that he used when he encountered something he hadn't planned for. "Evelyn," Derek said, "who is this?" "This is Harold Briggs," I said. "He's my attorney. Would you mind getting Madison? I need to speak with both of you." The pause that followed was not long, but it was dense with things that didn't get said. I watched Derek's face do several things in rapid succession confusion, then a flicker of something sharper, then the smooth, neutral expression he put on when he was thinking fast and didn't want anyone to know it. "Sure," he said finally. "Yeah, let me get her." Harold and I went into the kitchen. I poured him a cup of coffee because I knew he took it black, and I had made a fresh pot 20 minutes ago in preparation. He sat down at the table across from me and opened his briefcase and removed a folder that was considerably thicker than the one I had carried in my broken zippered bag. He set it on the table without opening it and folded his hands on top of it and waited, because waiting was something Harold did exceptionally well. We heard Madison's footsteps on the stairs, quick, slightly uneven, the cadence of someone who has been told something that put them off balance and is trying to recover it before they reach the bottom. She came into the kitchen doorway with Derek right behind her. She stopped when she saw Harold. She looked at me. Her face was doing something complicated. "Mom," she said, "what's going on?" "Sit down, sweetheart," I said. She didn't like that. I could see at the small bristle at being told to sit down in her own kitchen, in her own house. But she sat. Derek pulled out the chair beside her and sat too, and for a moment all four of us were just arranged around the kitchen table where I had made breakfast every morning for 6 weeks, and the silence was the kind that has weight to it. "I owe you some honesty," I said. "Both of you." Madison's jaw tightened. "If this is about the planter last night." "It's not about the planter," I said. "Then what, Madison?" My voice was quiet, completely steady. "Please let me talk." She closed her mouth. Something in my tone had reached her some quality that she perhaps hadn't heard from me before, or hadn't heard in a very long time. Quality of a person who has decided. I started at the beginning. Not the very beginning, not Columbus and the $800 in the library books, but far enough back that they could understand the shape of what I had built, and why I had built it the way I did. I told them about the trust. I told them that I had established it when Madison was 12 years old, and that it had been growing for 26 years. I told them about the properties, not which ones or exactly where, but that they existed. I told them that the financial catastrophe they believed had stripped me of everything had, in fact, stripped me only of the surface layer of the house in Tucson, the car, the pottery studio which I had let go of deliberately, because it was the right financial decision at the time, and because losing visible things, it turned out, was a useful way of seeing what became visible in their absence. I watched their faces while I talked. Derek went still in the way that still is different from calm, the way a person goes still when they're processing information that is rearranging the furniture of everything they thought they understood. Madison's expression moved through several phases that I could almost name in sequence: confusion, then dawning comprehension, then something I can only call a complicated guilt. The kind that arrives not when you've done one wrong thing, but when you suddenly see the entire architecture of wrong things stacked up behind you. "How much?" Derek said. It wasn't quite a question. Came out flat and direct, stripped of the careful social packaging he usually wrapped his words in. "That's not information I'm choosing to share right now," I said. "The documents tell you less than you think they tell you," I said. "I know you found them, Madison. I know you went through my bag. I know you called someone to ask about the trust structure. I know all of it." The silence after that was absolute. Madison's face had gone a color I had never seen on her before. Not red, more like the gray-white of something that has had all its warmth drained out very quickly. She started. "I'm not saying this to shame you," I said. "And I meant it. I'm saying it because you need to understand that I have known, from a much earlier point in this conversation, than you realize exactly what was happening. I came here aware that this was possible. I was watching us," Derek said. Something in his voice that I couldn't quite name, not anger exactly, but adjacent to it. The particular indignation of a person who has been observed doing something they would prefer had gone unobserved. "Yes," I said. He stopped, pressed his lips together. "Go ahead," I said. "Say what you were going to say." He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked away. He picked up his coffee mug and realized it was empty and set it back down. "Mom," Madison said, and her voice had changed. The flatness was gone. What was there instead was raw and unsteady, a voice with no performance left in it. "Mom, I need you to understand that I wasn't trying to. I wasn't planning to do anything. I just wanted to know. I just needed to understand what you actually had, because Derek and I have been under so much pressure, financially, and when I found those documents, you just started treating me differently," I said. She stopped. "Before you found them," I said, "you put me in the laundry room. You told me to be grateful for having a place to sleep. You spoke to me like I was an inconvenience you were managing. After you found them, You started asking me to dinner. You started being pleasant. You offered me the grocery card. I paused. Do you understand what I'm describing to you? She was staring at the table. Her hands were flat on the surface in front of her, very still. You treated me differently, depending on what you thought I was worth, I said. Not who I was, what I was worth, to you. The words landed one at a time, and I could see each one land. Derek opened his mouth. I looked at him. I would genuinely ask you not to, I said. He closed it. Harold sat at the far end of the table and said nothing, and looked at nothing in particular, in the way that very good attorneys learn to do when they are present at a moment that belongs to someone else. Madison started crying. Not the beautiful airport crying from 6 weeks ago. This was the other kind, the harder kind. The kind that doesn't have any presentation in it. She put her hand over her mouth and turned her face away from me, and her shoulders shook with it, and I sat across from her, and I did not reach out to touch her. I want you to understand how difficult that was. I want you to understand that there is no instinct stronger than the one that wants to comfort my daughter when she cries. It is the most basic thing in me, buried deeper than pride or anger or self-preservation. It is the thing that had always made it possible for people to take advantage of me, this reflex, to soothe, to smooth over, to make the other person's pain the priority. I sat on my hands metaphorically. I let her cry. I knew it was wrong, she finally said, muffled behind her hand. I knew it while I was doing it. I kept telling myself it wasn't that I was just looking out for us, for our family, that you would want us to be secure. Stop, I said, not harshly. Don't turn it into something you did for us. You did it because you were afraid, and because you thought I had something that could solve your fear, and you wanted access to it. Those are human reasons. They're not good ones, but they're human. I can understand a human reason. What I cannot pretend didn't happen is how you treated me when you thought I had nothing. She lowered her hand. Her face was wrecked mascara she'd put on that morning, smeared under both eyes, her mouth soft, and pulled down at the corners, looking in that moment more like 12-year-old Madison than 41-year-old Madison. It was horrible to you, she said. Yes, the laundry room. Yes. Mom, don't apologize yet, I said. I need you to hear the rest of what I have to tell you first. I told them about the businesses. Not all of them. Not the full structure that was still Harold's domain and would remain so. But I told them enough. I told them that among the investments in the trust were several ongoing business ventures that had, over the years, generated substantial returns. Some of those returns, I told them, had been directed quietly into places that benefited people I cared about, including them. Madison looked up from the table. What do you mean? She said. 3 years ago, I said, when Derek's company went through that first round of layoffs, and you called me in a panic because you were afraid you might lose the house. Do you remember that? She remembered. I could see it in her face. You called me and I told you that something would work out, I said. Do you remember what happened 2 weeks later? She was very still. Derek got the offer from the logistics firm, she said slowly. Out of nowhere. He hadn't even applied there. He hadn't applied there, I agreed. Derek went rigid in his chair. What are you saying? I'm saying that Harold made a phone call on my behalf, I said, to someone who owed me a professional favor. And that favor was calling in a reference for you to a company that had an opening they hadn't advertised yet. I looked at Derek directly. You got that job on your own merits. I want to be clear about that I didn't buy you anything except the introduction. But the introduction came from me. The silence in the kitchen was the densest it had been. Derek was looking at me with an expression that I could not entirely read shock, yes, and underneath it something that was wrestling with itself. You never said anything, Madison said. She was barely whispering. No, I said I didn't. Why, I thought about how to answer that. There were several true answers, and I chose the truest one. Because I wanted it to be a gift, I said, not a transaction. If I had told you, it would have become something you owed me, something that sat between us and changed the shape of things. I didn't want that. I wanted you to be safe, and I wanted it to cost you nothing. I paused. That is what love is supposed to look like. Not a bargaining chip. Not leverage. A gift given without accounting. Madison put her face in her hands. Derek stood up from the table. He walked to the kitchen window and stood there with his back to us, looking out at the backyard at the porch, where the broken planter pieces were still in a paper bag I had left there. And he said nothing, for a long time. I am not going to tell you that what followed was clean or simple, or that everything resolved itself in the kitchen that Saturday morning, because it didn't, And any story that tells you otherwise is lying to you. What followed was messy and uncomfortable, and at times almost unbearable, the way that real confrontations almost always are, when the people involved actually matter to each other. Derek turned around eventually. His face was doing something I hadn't seen it do. Before, the careful, constructed composure he maintained so naturally had cracked open somewhere in the middle, and what was underneath it was younger and less defended than I had expected. He sat back down at the table heavily, like a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has finally decided to put it down, even though he's not entirely sure the ground will hold. "I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one. Not a diplomatic one." He was looking at the table rather than at me, and I could hear how much effort the words cost him, which told me they were real. "The way I talked to you. Or didn't talk to you. The way I let..." He stopped. "The room," he said finally. "You should never have been in that room." "No," I said, "I shouldn't have." "I told myself it was temporary," he said. "I told myself a lot of things. People usually do," I said. "It doesn't make the things less true." He nodded once. Short and terse, the nod of a man who is accepting something he doesn't particularly enjoy accepting. Madison was still behind her hands. I finally reached across the table and touched her wrist lightly. Not holding, just touching, and she looked up with her ruined mascara and her red eyes, and she looked so terribly young. My daughter, so much younger than 41 years, should have left her. "Why did you come here?" she asked. "If you knew this might happen, if you had all of this, why did you come here instead of just..." "Because you are my daughter," I said, "and I needed to know who you were." I took my hand back. "I'm not entirely sure I know yet, but I know more than I did 6 weeks ago." "That's a horrible thing to say." "Yes," I said, "it is. And it's also completely true." She flinched. I watched her absorb it. "I've been protecting you your whole life," I said. "From things you never knew about, in ways you never saw. I don't regret any of it. It was my choice to make, and I made it willingly. But somewhere in all that protecting, I think I made a mistake. I think I protected you so thoroughly from having to see my strength that you stopped being able to imagine it. You looked at me and you saw a woman who needed saving, who needed charity, who needed a laundry room and a folding cot and a reminder to be grateful. I kept my voice even. I let you build that picture because I let the protecting happen invisibly. That's on me partly. I'm not pretending it isn't. But the rest of it," I said, "is on you. The decision to go through my things. The decision to call someone about the trust. The way you and Derek sat in this kitchen and talked about me like I was an asset to be evaluated. Those decisions belong to you." She didn't argue. I think in that moment she couldn't. Harold spoke for the first time since we'd all sat down. His voice was calm and measured and completely without drama, which was why I had always trusted him. "There are some practical matters," he said, "that Evelyn has asked me to walk through with you." Madison and Derek both looked at him, the slightly startled look of people who had almost forgotten he was there. "I'm going to be relocating," I said. "I've already arranged it. Harold has been coordinating." I watched Madison's face. "I found a place about 3 miles from here. It's mine. It's been in the trust for several years, a rental property that's been occupied, but the tenants moved out last month, and I had it prepared." I paused. "I'll be moving out by the end of next week." Mom Madison's voice cracked on the word. "This is not a punishment," I said, and I meant it absolutely. "I am not leaving to hurt you. I am leaving because I should have a home. A real one. Not a laundry room, not a temporary arrangement, not a situation where I am a guest in my daughter's house. I should have a place that belongs to me, where I can close the door and know that nothing in the room is contingent on someone else's goodwill." I looked at her steadily. I should have had that from the beginning. I should have arranged it before I ever got on that plane. That was my mistake, and I'm correcting it. "You don't have to go," Madison said. "We can fix this. Derek can move his stuff out of the guest room. We can This isn't about the guest room," I said gently. "You know that." She did know. I could see that she knew. "I'm not disappearing," I said. "I'm 3 miles away. I'm still your mother. Tyler can still come over and tell me about his video games, and I will still pretend to be more confused about them than I am." Something moved across her face. At that, a small, broken, almost smile. "But the terms of our relationship are going to be different going forward. They have to be. You understand why." "The trust," Derek said. He said it carefully, not as a demand, genuinely asking, Is any of that changing?" "Are you..." "Harold," I said. "Do you want to take that one?" Harold opened the folder on the table for the first time. He produced a single sheet of paper and placed it in front of Derek and Madison. The trust structure is not changing, Harold said. Evelyn's beneficiary designations remain as they were. What is changing is the management arrangement going forward, which Evelyn has restructured to ensure that all assets remain entirely under her control and cannot be accessed, influenced, or petitioned by any third party without her explicit written authorization. He said it pleasantly, in the tone of someone describing a minor administrative update. The changes were finalized this week. Derek read the paper. Madison read it after him. What it said, in the careful language that Harold used when he wanted something to be absolutely unambiguous, was that I had restructured the trust to make certain that no claim legal, emotional, or familial could be made against it without my active participation and consent. It was not punitive. It was protective. It was what I should have done the moment I decided to come to Portland, and I had not done it then, because some part of me had still been hoping. I had stopped hoping on the night of the broken planter. This seems, Derek started. Reasonable, Harold said, finishing the sentence in a direction that Derek had not been taking it. Yes, I think so too. We sat in that kitchen for another hour. I won't reconstruct every word of it, because some of what was said belongs to the people who said it and doesn't need to be carried further than that room. What I will tell you is that Madison cried more and apologized more, and Derek said less, but what he said was more costly to him, which in some ways counted for more. What I will tell you is that there were moments in that hour where I felt, underneath everything, a complicated sorrow not for myself, but for the version of this that could have happened differently. The version where I got off the plane in Portland and my daughter had looked at me and seen me, not a problem to be managed or an asset to be evaluated, just me. The version where none of this had been necessary. But I have lived long enough to know that mourning the version of things that didn't happen is a way of refusing to deal with the version that did, and I have never been someone who could afford that luxury. At the end of that hour, I stood up from the table. Harold stood with me, closed his briefcase, picked it up. I'm going to pack, I told them. Not coldly, not with ceremony, just stating a fact. Mom Madison stood too. She was still red-eyed and wrecked-looking, still wearing the complicated mess of someone who has been shown something about themselves that they cannot now unlearn. I know you said not to apologize yet, but I need you to know that I know, I said. And I did know. That was the complicated part I knew, and I had always known that my daughter loved me. The love was never the question. The question was always what she was willing to do when she thought I had nothing, what she was willing to give when there was nothing visible to gain in return. That was the question, and she had answered it, and the answer had not been what I hoped for, but it was honest. And I had always ultimately preferred honest to comfortable. I touched her face, just once briefly, the way I had when she was small and frightened and pressed against my neck. She closed her eyes. We're not finished, I told her, but we're also not the same as we were, and that's going to have to be okay for a while. She nodded with her eyes still closed. I went to the laundry room, my laundry room, the one with the folding cot and the rattling space heater and the shelf of bleach, and I started to pull my things together. 2 suitcases, the carry-on with the broken zipper, the paperback I'd been reading, which had a bus transfer ticket from 3 weeks ago as a bookmark, because I hadn't had anything else on hand. Cardigan I'd left on the hook behind the door. I stood in the middle of that small, cold room for a moment before I started packing. I stood there and I let myself feel it, not just the indignation, not just the vindication, but the whole complicated weight of it. The loneliness of 6 weeks of folding cot and rattling heater. The grief of watching my daughter be someone I hadn't raised her to be. The particular exhaustion of holding yourself together across weeks of being treated like you're worth less than you know you are. Felt it. Then I set it down. I took the suitcase off the cot and opened it on the floor and began to fold my things into it with the same quiet efficiency I had brought to every practical task in my life. And I did not look around the room when I was done. I did not give it a last meaningful glance. It was a laundry room. It had never been anything else. The only thing I took from the shelf was the little lost button that had been sitting up there since before I arrived. I picked it up and held it for a moment, small and white and completely ordinary, this thing that nobody had bothered to retrieve, and then I put it in my coat pocket. I am not entirely sure why. Sometimes you carry a small thing out of a hard place just to prove to yourself that you were there, that it was real, that you came through it and out the other side. I was 68 years old. I had come through it. I zipped the suitcase shut. I picked up the carry-on. The zipper was still broken, still held with the same rubber band, and I walked out of the laundry room and down the hall, and through the kitchen where Harold was waiting by the door, and I did not look back. Harold drove me to the house himself. He didn't offer. He just picked up my larger suitcase and carried it to his sensible gray sedan and put it in the trunk with the careful efficiency of a man who has decided something and sees no reason to discuss it further. I carried the other suitcase and the broken zippered carry-on, and I put them in the back seat, and I got in the front, and we pulled away from Madison's Craftsman house on that Portland street without ceremony or announcement, just the quiet sound of tires on wet pavement and the gray November sky sitting low over everything like a lid. I didn't look back. I had meant what I said in the laundry room. I was not going to give that place a meaningful parting glance. It did not deserve one. Harold drove in silence for the first several minutes. Good at silence. Harold, he knew the difference between a silence that needed filling and one that needed protecting. And he protected this one until we were far enough from Madison's neighborhood that the streets had changed character entirely. "Are you all right?" he asked finally. "I'm tired," I said. "But yes, that took courage," he said. "What you did in there." "It took preparation," I said. "Courage is what you need when you haven't prepared." I had prepared. He made a small sound that was almost a laugh. "Fair enough." We drove the rest of the way without much more talk. 3 miles as I had told Madison and Derek. 3 miles that felt, when Harold turned the car onto the quiet street and I saw the house for the first time with my own eyes rather than through the photographs, Harold had sent 3 miles that felt like crossing from one version of my life into another. Not a better version, necessarily. Not yet just a different one I was choosing for myself rather than accepting from someone else, and that difference was everything. The house was a bungalow, cream-colored with dark green trim, on a block of similar houses that had the comfortable, slightly worn look of a neighborhood that had been lived in by real people rather than staged for appearances. There was a Japanese maple in the front yard that had dropped most of its leaves and stood now in its winter nakedness, its branches reaching in all directions with a kind of unhurried confidence that I found, immediately, and without quite knowing why, comforting. There was a porch with 2 wooden chairs on it. The chairs needed repainting. I made a note of this, and then felt something unfamiliar and small move through me, a feeling it took me a moment to identify. It was anticipation. The small, clean kind, attached to a concrete future task. Those chairs need repainting, and I will repaint them. The kind of feeling that means you are already imagining yourself inside a life rather than standing outside it. I had not felt that in a long time. Harold carried my larger suitcase up the porch steps. He had the key, which he handed to me rather than using himself, because Harold understood that there are moments that belong to the person whose moment it is. I put the key in the lock and turned it and pushed the door open and stood in the doorway for just a second before I went inside. The house smelled like fresh paint and a little bit like the lemon-scented cleaning product that Harold's property management contact had apparently used on every surface. It was furnished. Harold had arranged a basic set of furniture for the rooms. Nothing extravagant, just the things you need to actually inhabit a space, a bed, a couch, a kitchen table with chairs that matched, a lamp for the living room. It was not beautiful yet. It was a beginning. The bones of something that could become whatever I decided to make it. I walked through the rooms slowly. Harold stayed in the entryway, giving me the space to do this without witness. Kitchen had a window over the sink that looked out into the backyard, a small yard with a wooden fence and a dormant garden bed along one side that someone had let go. Brown stalks of what might have been tomatoes still tied to their cages with strips of old cloth. The bathroom was small but had good light. The bedroom had a closet with actual shelving in it, real shelving, built in, enough space to hang things without crowding them. I stood in the middle of the bedroom for a long moment. The bed was made. Harold's detail orientation extended to having the property prepared, as though someone was expected, which someone was. I sat on the edge of the bed, not a folding cot, a real bed, a queen-sized one with a headboard and a mattress that had actual give to it when I pressed my hand down. I pressed my hand down on it and felt the give, and I sat there in the quiet of my own bedroom in my own house, and I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet, private kind that doesn't need an audience. I cried because I was 68 years old, and I was sitting on a real bed in a room that belonged to me, and the fact that this felt extraordinary was itself the saddest part of the whole story. It should not have been extraordinary. It should have been ordinary. It should have been the thing I stepped into automatically the moment I decided to leave Tucson, instead of the thing I had to endure 6 weeks of laundry room to earn. But it was what it was, and I had it now, and I was done crying about the path by the time Harold appeared in the bedroom doorway to ask if I needed anything before he left. "I'm fine," I told him. My voice was steady. "Thank you, Harold, for everything. Call me if you need anything," he said. "And Evelyn," he paused, which was unusual for Harold. "For what it's worth. You handled that better than most people would have." "I'll take that," I said. He nodded and left. And I heard the front door close with a solid, real sound, the sound of a door that fits its frame properly, that was built to close and closes well, and I was alone in my house for the first time. I sat on the bed for another few minutes. Then I got up and started unpacking. The first week was strange in a way I hadn't anticipated. I had spent 6 weeks in Madison's house, moving carefully around other people's rhythms, adjusting my waking time, my movements through the kitchen, my presence in common spaces to minimize friction, and now I was in a space where there was no one else's rhythm to navigate, and the freedom of it was almost disorienting. I kept catching myself hesitating before turning on the kitchen light at 5:30 in the morning, some residual reflex from weeks of trying not to disturb people. I kept moving through the rooms with the contracted, apologetic body language of someone who expects to be told they're taking up too much space. It took me several days to stop doing that, to stand at my own kitchen counter and make coffee without bracing for someone's displeasure, to eat breakfast at whatever time I wanted, whatever I wanted, with the radio on if I felt like it, or in complete silence if I preferred that. Small freedoms, laughably small, in the abstract things that any person living alone takes completely for granted. They did not feel small to me that first week. They felt enormous. I went to the hardware store on my third day and bought paint for the porch chairs. Particular shade of deep teal that I had always liked and that Robert had always said was too bold for outdoor furniture. And I had agreed with him at the time because agreeing was easier than the small argument that would have followed. And the small argument wasn't worth it to me then. It was worth it to me now. I bought the teal paint and I brought it home. And I spent an afternoon on the porch in a jacket and old gloves working it into the wood with a brush. And when I was done, the chairs looked exactly the way I had wanted them to look. And I sat in one of them still slightly tacky. I should have waited, but I didn't. And I looked out at the Japanese maple in the quiet street and I thought, this is mine. Not the chair specifically, or the maple, or even the house, in the way that ownership is usually meant. I mean the moment, the choosing, the teal paint and the deciding without consulting anyone. And the slightly tacky chair, and the cold air and the maple standing in its winter branches, and all of it belonging to me in the way that experiences belong to you fully, without negotiation. I had not had that feeling in a very long time. Possibly I had never had it, not like this, because even in the years when I was building the trust and managing the portfolio and making financial decisions that nobody around me knew about, those decisions had always been made in the context of protecting other people. Robert, Madison, the future. I had never simply done something for the pleasure of doing it the way I wanted it done. It turned out teal was exactly the right color for those chairs. Madison called on the 4th day. I let it ring through to voicemail. Not because I was punishing her, I had meant what I said about not seeking revenge, but because I was not ready yet. And for the first time in a very long time, I was allowing myself the radical act of not doing something until I was ready. Her voicemail was long and uneven, the voice of someone who had rehearsed what she wanted to say, and then abandoned the rehearsal midway through. She said she was sorry again, and in more specific terms this time, naming things rather than offering a general apology. She said that she had been thinking about the job. Derek's job, 3 years ago, the phone call Harold had made on my behalf. She said she hadn't slept well since Saturday, and that Derek hadn't either, and that Tyler kept asking where Grandma Ev was, and she didn't know what to tell him. She said she wasn't calling to ask for anything. She just needed me to know that she understood more than she had understood before, and that she was trying to figure out how to be better at something she wasn't sure she'd ever been taught to do correctly. That last part stopped me. I listened to it twice. Something she wasn't sure she'd ever been taught to do correctly. I sat with that for a while. I sat with the complicated question of how much of what Madison had become was Madison's doing, and how much of it was the accumulation of lessons she had absorbed from watching me stay silent, watching me absorb and smooth over and make invisible all the things that cost me, watching me model a particular kind of self-erasure, as though it were virtue. How much had I taught my daughter, without meaning to, that the people who love you are allowed to take without asking? That a mother's job is to give without accounting? I did not call her back that day, but I thought about her more gently than I had the day before, which was something. Harold came by on the second week with a folder of paperwork that required my signatures, various documents related to the trust restructuring we'd finalized, some property management transfers, a few other administrative items that I will not bore you with the specifics of. We sat at my kitchen table in my kitchen, with coffee I had made in a coffee maker that I had purchased myself at a shop 2 blocks from the house, and we went through everything methodically, the way Harold and I had always done business. When we were done, he closed the folder and accepted a refill and said, "I have something to tell you. It's not urgent, but you should know." I looked at him over my cup. "Someone called my office," he said, "earlier this week. A man didn't give his name, asking about the trust structure and whether it was possible to initiate a beneficiary dispute." Harold said this the way he said most things, evenly, without drama, like reading from a report. My assistant told him, accurately, that there was no information she could provide about any client matter, and that he was welcome to consult his own legal counsel if he had a specific concern. He didn't leave a message or a callback number. I set my cup down. "Derek," I said. "I have no way of knowing that," Harold said carefully. "No," I said. "But I do." Harold said nothing. He had the lawyer's talent for silence that communicates clearly without committing to anything. I thought about Derek. I thought about the man I had watched calculate behind his neutral expressions for 6 weeks, the man who had said, "Okay, we need to think about this carefully," in a kitchen while his wife's elderly mother lay on a folding cot 12 feet away. I thought about the phone call and what it meant: not a legal threat, not yet, probably not ever. It would have been too risky, and Derek was above all things a man who calculated risk. More likely it was reconnaissance. Finding out whether the door was open before deciding whether to walk through it. The door was not open. Harold and I had made sure of that. But the call itself told me something I needed to know, which was that my departure from that house had not prompted in Derek the kind of genuine reckoning I had seen flicker briefly in his face at the kitchen table on Saturday. Or if it had, the reckoning hadn't lasted. That part of him, the calculating part, the part that ran numbers on human relationships, was still running, still looking for angles, still trying to find a way to make the situation profitable. People are not always one thing. I know that. Derek was capable of the moment at the kitchen table, and he was also capable of the phone call to Harold's office, and both of those things were true at the same time, and I was going to have to hold that complexity without resolving it into something simpler. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "Of course," Harold said. Picked up his folder. "The restructuring is solid, Evelyn. There's nothing actionable there. Anyone who tried to move against it would spend a significant amount of money to find that out." "Good," I said. He stood, straightened his jacket, picked up his briefcase. Then he paused in the way he had paused the week before, the unusual pause of a man for whom pausing was not natural. "You built something remarkable," he said, "over a lot of years. I've watched you do it, and I want you to know I don't think you understand how unusual it is. What you built, how you built it." "I had good help," I said. "You had adequate help," he said dryly. "The building was yours." After he left, I stood at the kitchen window for a while and looked out at the dormant garden bed with its spent tomato cages and their strips of old cloth, and I thought about what he'd said. "You don't think you understand how unusual it is." He was right that I had difficulty seeing it clearly. I had lived so long inside the invisibility of it, the deliberate, chosen invisibility, that the thing itself had also become somewhat invisible to me. I had built it as protection, as foundation, as a kind of silent promise to myself that I made when I was 30 years old and beginning to understand how the world worked. I had built it, and then I had built a whole visible life on top of it, The coffee maker, and the pottery studio, and the marriage, and the motherhood, all the things that were real and that mattered, and the foundation had simply stayed there, holding everything up, unseen. Now the visible life had been stripped back, and the foundation was what remained. I thought that was always the plan. You just didn't know it would happen like this. Tyler appeared at my door on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after I had moved out. He rang the doorbell with the slightly hesitant energy of a 12-year-old who is not entirely sure he's supposed to be somewhere, but has come anyway. And when I opened the door, he was standing on the porch in his school backpack, with his hands in the front pocket of his hoodie, looking at my teal chairs with an expression of genuine appreciation. "Those are a cool color," he said. "Thank you," I said. "I painted them myself." "Did Grandpa Robert like that color?" "He thought it was too bold for outdoor furniture," I said. Tyler considered this. "I think it's the right amount of bold," he said seriously. I stepped back from the door. "Come in. I'll make hot chocolate." Came in and dropped his backpack by the door and looked around the house with the frank, curious assessment that children bring to new spaces, turning in a slow circle in the living room before following me to the kitchen. "Mom said to tell you." "She didn't tell me to come," he said, climbing onto a kitchen chair. "She said I could if I wanted to, but she wasn't telling me to." "I believe that," I said. "I was at the stove, heating milk. How are things at the house?" "Okay," he said. In the way 12-year-olds say okay when they mean something more complicated but haven't found the words for it yet. "Dad's been kind of quiet. Mom cried at dinner one time, but she said it was because of a sad movie, except the TV wasn't on." I kept my back to him for a moment, so he wouldn't see my face. "People get sad sometimes," I said. "That's normal." "Are you sad?" he asked. I turned around and looked at him, this boy with his father's broad shoulders already coming in, and his mother's eyes and his grandmother's, apparently, appreciation for a bold color choice. He was looking at me with genuine curiosity, not worried exactly, just wanting to know the real answer. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "Not right now." "Good," he said, with the simple, satisfied finality of someone who has received the information they were looking for. "Can I come over again? Like regularly?" "Whenever you want," I said. "As long as your parents know where you are." "Obviously," he said, the word carrying the full weight of 12-year-old dignity. I put his hot chocolate in front of him and sat across the table, and he told me about his video games for 45 minutes, and I listened to every word. The hardest part of those early weeks was not the loneliness which I had expected and prepared for. The hardest part was the anger which I had not. I had told myself, in the kitchen at Madison's house, that I was not seeking revenge, that this was not about punishment, that I understood the human complexity of what had happened and was choosing to respond with clarity rather than retaliation. All of that was true, and it coexisted, uncomfortably, with an anger that arrived in waves at unpredictable moments, standing at the bathroom sink in the morning, or halfway through a walk around the neighborhood, or in the middle of the night when the house was quiet and the dark had a particular quality that made it hard to maintain the composed, considered version of myself that I preferred. The anger was about the laundry room, but it was also about more than the laundry room. It was about every moment of my life in which I had made myself smaller than I was for someone else's comfort. Every time I had agreed with Robert about the chairs when I wanted teal. Every time I had absorbed Madison's criticism and smoothed it into something acceptable. Every time I had stood in a room full of people who did not know what I was capable of, and had made the choice to let them not know, because the knowing would have changed things in ways I was not prepared to manage. I had told myself those choices were about protection, and some of them were. But honesty requires me to admit that some of them were also about fear, the specific, gendered fear of being a woman who takes up too much space, who knows too much, who has built too much. The fear that if people saw the full picture, they would be threatened by it, or resentful of it, or would simply not believe it. And the not believing would be, in some ways, the worst outcome of all. I had spent 68 years being afraid of that, and the fear had been so old and so familiar that I had stopped being able to distinguish it from wisdom. Lying on my real bed in my real house at 2 in the morning, I was angry about that. I was angry at myself, as much as at anyone else, maybe more, because I was the one who had stayed quiet. I was the one who had packed the visible things and let the invisible ones keep doing their quiet work without ever standing in the light and saying, "Look, Look at what I built. Look at what I am. The anger wasn't clean. It didn't resolve into anything useful at 2 in the morning. It just was. The way grief is present and inconvenient and real, something you move through rather than something you solve. I moved through it. 6 weeks after I moved into the bungalow, a woman named Patricia Osei knocked on my door. Patricia was 63, a retired accountant who lived 4 houses down and had a habit, she explained without embarrassment, of introducing herself to new neighbors before they'd been in the neighborhood long enough to have settled opinions about her. She was Nigerian American, second generation, with a directness of manner that I recognized immediately as the thing people mean when they say someone is no nonsense, not unkind, just thoroughly uninterested in the parts of social interaction that are about performance rather than actual human contact. She brought a plate of chin-chin, a fried dough snack, that she explained her mother had made every Sunday and that she still made every few weeks because it was the most efficient use of her hands when she needed to think about something. And she sat at my kitchen table and ate 3 pieces without asking permission. And I found her immediately, completely, and unexpectedly delightful. We talked for 2 hours. About the neighborhood, about the neighbors, about the Japanese maple in my front yard, which she had apparently always admired, and which she told me, with the authority of someone who had lived 4 houses away from it for 11 years, needed a specific kind of pruning in the spring, or it would go sideways. About her retirement, which she had taken at 60, because she had decided she was done doing things, primarily because they made financial sense. About her daughter in Atlanta and her son in Vancouver, and the complicated, rewarding, occasionally maddening business of loving people from a distance. You came from somewhere else, she said at some point. Not a question. Tucson, I said, most recently. Originally Ohio. You came to be near family? I came to be near my daughter. I paused. It's complicated. Family always is, Patricia said, with the serenity of someone who has made peace with this fact, rather than still fighting it. My mother used to say that the people you love the most are the ones with the best aim. I thought about that. That's accurate, I said. They know where to put the knife, she said simply, and ate another piece of chin-chin, and didn't offer any further philosophical commentary, which was exactly the right move. Before she left, she told me that there was a small investment group that met monthly 3 women from the neighborhood, retired or semi-retired, who pooled modest resources and made collective decisions about where to put them. They were not sophisticated investors, she said, with the candor of someone who finds honesty more efficient than false modesty. They made decent decisions, but they could use someone who knew what they were doing. Would I be interested in joining? I looked at her across the table. Patricia Osei, who brought chin-chin to new neighbors and told them the truth about their maple trees and used the phrase best aim about the people who loved you. Yes, I said. I would. She nodded, satisfied. Thursday evening, she said. We meet at my place. Bring something to eat if you want, or don't. Nobody's keeping track. After she left, I sat at the table for a while. Plate of chin-chin was still there, half eaten. The afternoon light had shifted while we talked, gone golden and low the way it does in November, when the sun is already thinking about leaving. I sat in it, and I felt something that I can only describe as the beginning of something not happiness exactly, which is too simple a word for what I mean, but the sense of a life orienting itself, finding its direction, remembering that it had one. I thought about Patricia's investment group. I thought about 3 women meeting on Thursday evenings to make collective decisions, not perfectly, not sophisticatedly, just thoughtfully and together. I thought about what I could bring to that table, not just financially, but the whole of what I had learned across 68 years of watching and reading and building in the quiet margins while the world thought it had me figured out. I thought about what it would feel like to stop being invisible. Not because I was forced out of invisibility by someone finding my documents or confronting me in a kitchen, but because I chose it. Because I walked into a room and said, here is what I know. Here is what I've built. Let me be useful with it. I had hidden myself for so long. I had hidden myself for good reasons, and then for reasons that were less good, and then eventually out of pure, calcified habit that I had mistaken for wisdom. I was done hiding. Not done protecting myself, the trust was restructured. Harold was watchful. The door Derek had tried to open would stay closed. But protecting yourself and hiding yourself are not the same thing, and I had spent too many years treating them as identical. I got up and put the kettle on for tea. While it heated, I went to the small desk I had set up in the corner of the living room, a writing desk. Nothing elaborate, just a surface that belonged to me in a room that was mine, and I opened the laptop and I wrote an email. Not to Harold, not to Madison, to a woman named Constance Webb, who ran a nonprofit financial literacy organization out of Northeast Portland that I had read about in a community newsletter that Patricia had left on my porch her first visit because she thought I might find it interesting. I told Constance that I had some financial expertise and some time and some interest in making them useful. I told her I was not looking for recognition or a formal role, just the chance to contribute something that might actually help someone. I told her I was 68 years old and recently relocated, and had more energy than the circumstances of my recent past might suggest. I hit send before I could reconsider it. Then I made my tea and took it to the porch, and sat in the teal chair. The paint was fully dry now, had been for weeks. And I wrapped both hands around the cup, and I looked at the Japanese maple in the failing afternoon light, its bare branches reaching in all directions, with that unhurried confidence I had noticed on the first day. And I thought about pruning and growing and the complicated necessary relationship between the two. The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at something, then stopped. A car passed, and its headlights swept briefly across the maple's branches and moved on. I was 68 years old. I had a house that was mine. I had a friend 4 doors down who brought chin chin and told the truth. I had a grandson who thought teal was exactly the right amount of bold. I had an email in my sent folder that felt, small as it was, like a door I had just chosen to open. I had, for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, a life that belonged to me in all its dimensions, not just the hidden ones, not just the careful, protected, invisible ones, but the visible parts too. Porch, the chair, the tea, the reaching maple. The ordinary, extraordinary fact of sitting in the cold November air on my own property and feeling, beneath the tiredness and the grief and the anger that was still there in its complicated ongoing way, something that I recognized as the foundation. Still intact, still solid, still mine. And from a foundation, if it's real, if it was built right, over decades, with care and without shortcuts, you can build almost anything. I finished my tea. I went inside. I washed the cup and set it on the rack to dry, and turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed in my real bedroom on my real bed, and I lay in the dark, and I was not afraid of what came next. I was quietly and without fanfare and without anyone there to witness it, ready for it. Constance Webb wrote back within 2 days. Her email was 3 paragraphs long and direct in the way that people are direct, when they have too much work and too little time for social padding. She said she had looked me up, not an intrusive look, she clarified. Just the basic due diligence she applied to anyone who offered to volunteer in a financial capacity, and that what she had found was, in her words, considerably more than she had expected from the email's modest framing. She didn't specify what she had found, and I didn't ask. Harold maintained a certain professional footprint on my behalf that was accurate without being comprehensive, the financial equivalent of a well-fitted coat. It covered what needed covering and suggested the rest without displaying it. She asked if I could come in on a Friday morning. She said they worked with primarily low-income women, many of them elderly, many of them recently widowed or divorced, many of them encountering for the first time the terrifying experience of being solely responsible for financial decisions they had never been allowed to be part of before. She said what they needed most was not someone to lecture about index funds, but someone who could sit across a table from a frightened woman and help her understand that the numbers were not her enemy, that she could learn this, that it was not too late. I read that last line twice, that it was not too late. I wrote back and said I would be there Friday at 9. I want to tell you what those Friday mornings became, because they became something I had not planned for and could not have predicted, and that mattered to me in a way that snuck up on me sideways, the way the most important things tend to do. Constance's organization operated out of a converted storefront in Northeast Portland, a narrow space with mismatched furniture and too many filing cabinets and a coffee maker that was older than some of the volunteers, and produced, despite its age, genuinely excellent coffee. There were 4 other regular volunteers when I started, a retired bank manager named George, who was 74 and had hands that shook slightly, but a mind that did not. A woman named Diane, who had been a high school math teacher for 30 years and approached financial illiteracy with the same patient, structured methodology she had brought to algebra. A young woman named Priya, who was in her late 20s and worked in tech during the week and gave her Friday mornings to this, because she said she had watched her grandmother get swindled by a predatory reverse mortgage lender and had never fully gotten over it. And then there was me. Constance put me with the clients she described, carefully, as the complicated ones, which was her shorthand for the women who had been burned. Not just financially confused or inexperienced, but actively damaged by someone who had taken advantage of their trust. Women who had handed over their financial lives to a husband or a son-in-law and discovered too late that the handing over had come at a cost they hadn't understood when they made the choice. Women who had been told for so long and by so many people that money was not their domain, that the numbers were too complicated, that they should just let someone else handle it, and who had believed it, and who were now sitting in mismatched chairs in a converted storefront trying to learn, at 65 or 70 or 78, the language of their own financial survival. I sat across from them, and I did not lecture. I did not use jargon or explain things in ways that assumed prior knowledge. I asked them to tell me what they understood, and I started from there, wherever there was, and I built from the ground up with the patience of someone who knows that understanding takes as long as it takes and cannot be rushed without breaking. But the thing that I gave those women that no amount of financial knowledge could have provided, the thing that Constance told me months later, was the reason the clients asked for me specifically was this: I had been where they were. Not in terms of the numbers, my situation had never been their situation, but in terms of the feeling. The feeling of sitting in a room where someone had decided what you were worth without asking you. The feeling of being treated as less capable, less present, less real than you actually were. The feeling of having your own life held slightly out of your reach by the assumptions of people who thought they knew better. I knew that feeling, and they could see that I knew it, and that made the difference. I am telling you this because I want you to understand something that took me a long time to understand about myself. The things that happened to me in that laundry room, and in the years of invisibility before it, were not only losses. They were also, in a way I would not have chosen, but cannot deny, a kind of preparation. The hiding had cost me. The silence had cost me. But they had also given me something, a knowledge of what it feels like to be underestimated, that I could now put in service of people who needed someone to understand it without being told. Nothing is wasted if you use it right. That took me 68 years to learn, and I am not sure I fully believe it even now, on the days when the anger comes back at 2 in the morning. But I believe it more than I used to. Madison called 7 times in the first 2 months. I answered the 3rd call, and the 5th, and the 7th. The conversations were not easy. I want to be clear about that because I think stories about family reconciliation tend to paper over the difficulty of the middle part, the part that is not the dramatic confrontation and not the eventual resolution, but the long, uncomfortable, unglamorous work of 2 people trying to figure out how to exist in each other's lives after something has been broken and before it has been repaired. The 3rd call, she talked for most of it. She had been seeing a therapist, she told me this, with the slight defiance of someone who has done something they're not sure will be received well, who needs to say it before they lose the nerve. And the therapist had apparently been asking her questions about her childhood, that she had found uncomfortable and illuminating in approximately equal measure. She said she had not realized, until someone asked her to look at it directly, how much of her sense of safety had always been contingent on my being a certain kind of person. Manageable, comprehensible, someone whose limitations she understood. I needed you to be limited, she said, and I could hear how much the admission cost her. I think I needed you to need me. And when I found out you didn't, not really something about that felt like a betrayal, which I know doesn't make sense. I know you didn't do anything wrong by being capable, but that's how it felt. I sat with that for a moment. The daughter who needed her mother to need her. The mother who had spent decades making herself invisible so as not threaten the people she loved. The particular painful irony of those 2 things meeting each other and producing exactly the damage they were each trying to avoid. I think I made it worse, I said, by hiding so much for so long. I gave you a picture of me that wasn't complete, And then when the real picture appeared, it felt like a stranger. "You're not a stranger," she said, fiercely, the way Madison had always been fierce when something mattered to her. "You're my mother. That's the most not stranger thing there is." "I know," I said, "but you need to get to know the rest of me. The parts I kept hidden, that's going to take time." "I know," she said. Then quieter, "Are you willing to let me try?" I looked out my kitchen window at the dormant garden bed. The tomato cages were still there. I had not removed them yet because I was planning in the spring to use the bed to plant something new in the ground that someone else had prepared and then abandoned. "Yes," I said, "but slowly, and on terms that are mine as much as yours." "Okay," she said. And Madison, I paused. Derek called Harold's office. The silence on the other end of the phone was the specific silence of someone who already knew this and has been dreading the moment it would be said. "I know," she said finally. "He was looking for a way in. A legal angle, I know." Her voice was barely audible. It was a bad fight about it. He said he was just getting information, that he wasn't planning to do anything, that I was overreacting." A pause. "I don't think I was overreacting." "No," I said. "You weren't. I told him that if he ever contacted your attorney again, for any reason related to your finances, I would consider that a line I could not come back from." She said it with a flatness that was different from the flatness I had heard for 6 weeks in her kitchen. This one had something beneath it that was not contempt or impatience, but the sound of a person who has decided something and is not sure what it will cost them and is holding the decision anyway. I meant it. I believed her, which surprised me somewhat and moved me more than I expected. "How is he?" I asked. Because he was still her husband and Tyler's father, and because I had meant it when I said I was not interested in revenge. "Struggling," she said. I think what happened scared him. Not just the trust structure stuff. I think sitting in that kitchen and hearing all of it scared him. I think he saw something about himself that he hadn't wanted to look at." She paused. "He asked me to tell you he's sorry. I told him he needed to tell you himself when you were ready to hear it." "He can tell me," I said. "When I'm ready, I was not ready yet. But I was willing to become ready, which is its own kind of progress." The Thursday evening investment group at Patricia's house became one of the constants that organized my weeks. The 3 women who had been meeting before I joined Patricia, and a woman named Ruth who had retired from sourcing and had the bedside manner of someone constitutionally incapable of wasting words, and a woman named Sylvia who had run a small catering business for 20 years and thought about money with the practical, unsentimental clarity of someone who had met payroll every week for 2 decades, received me with the same directness Patricia had brought to my door on that first afternoon. No ceremony, no excessive welcome, just, "Here is where we are. Here is what we've been doing. What do you think?" I told them what I thought. Clearly, without the hedging I had spent decades using to make my opinions more palatable, without the apologetic downtuning of expertise that women of my generation had been socialized to perform so as not to seem threatening. I told them what I thought about their current holdings and what I would change, and why, with the reasoning laid out so they could evaluate it themselves rather than simply defer to me. Ruth looked at me when I finished and said, "Where have you been for the last 11 years?" "Tucson," I said. "And before that, Ohio." "Well," she said, "you're here now." I was there, in Patricia's kitchen, on a Thursday evening, with my reading glasses on and my coffee in front of me and my opinions out in the open air where they belonged. I was there and I was visible, and I was not apologizing for either of those things. What we built together over the following months was not dramatic. I want to be honest about that the investment group did not make anyone rich, did not produce a transformation that you could cut a film trailer from. What it produced was the quieter, more durable thing, better decisions, made more carefully, by 4 women who trusted each other enough to disagree. Ruth challenged my reasoning on 2 occasions, and she was right both times, which I told her directly because I have never seen the use in refusing to acknowledge when someone is right. Sylvia brought a practicality to risk assessment that I had not had in my own solo decision-making, for years the caterer's eye for what could actually go wrong on the day, not just in the model. Patricia had an instinct for people and companies that was less quantitative than my usual approach and more accurate than I initially gave it credit for. We made each other better. That is what a good partnership does, and I had not had one in a very long time. The conversation I had been both anticipating and dreading came on a Sunday afternoon in February, 4 months after I had left the laundry room behind. Madison called and asked if she could come over. Not with Derek, just her. She asked if that was all right. I said yes. I made tea and I put Patricia's leftover chin-chin on a plate. Patricia brought it to me regularly now, in quantities that suggested she had adopted me as a secondary household and was committed to feeding me whether I needed it or not. And I sat in the living room and waited. Madison arrived with wet hair, which meant she had showered recently and not bothered to dry it properly before getting in the car, told me she had been anxious enough about this visit that she had prioritized leaving on time over looking composed. Small things. I had always read my daughter in small things. She came in and looked around the house. She had not been inside it before, had only seen it from the car when she dropped Tyler off once, and her face did something complicated as she took in the rooms. The desk in the corner, the books on the shelves I had bought from a second-hand store on Burnside, the reading lamp angled just right over the chair that had become mine, in the way that certain chairs become yours. After enough evenings, she looked at all of it with an expression I recognized as grief. The particular grief of seeing someone you love living well in a place that exists because of harm you caused. "It's nice," she said. "It really is." "Sit down," I said. "There's tea." She sat. She wrapped her hands around the mug I gave her, and she looked at the chin-chin on the plate and almost smiled. "Patricia," I said. "She feeds me whether I ask or not." "She sounds like someone you needed," Madison said. "She is," I said. We were quiet for a moment. The particular Sunday quiet of a house in winter, when the light comes in low and golden, and everything outside is still. "I need to tell you something," Madison said, "and I need to tell it to you without it being a negotiation. I'm not asking for anything when I say this. I just need you to hear it." "All right," I said. She looked at her mug. "When I was looking through your documents, when I found the trust information, the first thing I felt wasn't greed." She said it carefully, testing the sentence as she built it. "The first thing I felt was relief. And then immediately after the relief came the shame, because I knew what the relief was about." She looked up at me. "It was relief that you were okay, that you had something, that all those years of watching you, manage and cope and handle everything, without complaining, that they hadn't left you with nothing, that the woman I had been scared for was actually safe." I looked at her, and then she said, the calculation started, and Derek started asking questions, and I let myself get pulled into a version of it that was not about relief anymore. It was about something uglier. And I have been trying to understand, since that Saturday in the kitchen, how I got from one to the other so fast. She paused. "I don't have a clean answer. I don't think there is one. I think I am someone who loves you, and is also someone who, under the right kind of pressure, is capable of treating you like a resource. And I have to live with both of those things being true at the same time." The room was very quiet. "I know," I said finally. "That's not an excuse," she said. "I know it's not," I said. "I'm not receiving it as one. I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "I know that takes time. I know I haven't earned it yet. I'm asking if there's a version of this where you and I are still mother and daughter, where Tyler has his grandmother, where we don't let this be the thing that ends us." I set my own mug down. I looked at my daughter, this complicated, flawed, 41-year-old woman who had pressed her face against my neck when she was 7 and screamed at me that she couldn't wait to leave when she was 17 and cried ugly airport tears when she was 41 and told me to be grateful for a laundry room, and then sat in my living room in February with wet hair and asked me a question that deserved a real answer. "There is," I said. "There always was. But it's going to look different than it did before." "Different how?" "I am not going to hide myself from you anymore," I said. "The things I built, the decisions I make, the opinions I have, those are going to be visible. You're going to have to get used to knowing your mother more completely than you did before. That includes the parts that might make you uncomfortable." She nodded. "Okay, and I need honesty in return. Not just about the money, not just about Derek, about everything. If you're struggling, I want to know. If you're afraid of something, I want to know. I am not able to protect you from things I don't know about, and I am not willing to protect you from things you haven't told me." "Okay," she said again. "And then Derek wants to apologize to you." I told him. "I know," I said. "You told him when I was ready. I'm working on it." "What does working on it look like?" I thought about that. It looks like remembering that he is human and that human beings are capable of being both the person who calculates and the person who is frightened. Those aren't always different people. Sometimes they're the same person in the same week. I paused. I'm not there yet, but I'm moving toward it. Madison looked at me for a long moment. You're more generous than I would be, she said. I'm not generous, I said. I'm practical. Holding that kind of anger costs more than I want to spend. She almost laughed. Almost. That's very you, she said, framing forgiveness as a financial decision. Everything is a financial decision if you look at it right, I said. Cost, benefit, what you're willing to pay for what return. This time she did laugh. Small and uncertain, more like the memory of a laugh than the thing itself, but real. And I felt something in the room shift slightly, not resolve, not heal, nothing that clean but shift. Move incrementally towards something that might eventually be all right. We sat together in the low February light, and we drank our tea and ate Patricia's chin-chin, and we talked. Not about the trust or the laundry room or Harold or the phone call Derek had made. We talked about Tyler, about the video games he kept trying to explain to both of us, with the earnest patience of someone who believes comprehension is achievable if he just finds the right words. We talked about Madison's therapist, whose name was Dr. Reeves, and who had, according to Madison, a talent for asking questions that sounded simple and turned out to be the opposite. We talked about the dormant garden bed in my backyard and what I was planning to plant in it in the spring. Tomatoes, I said, and maybe some herbs. The bed is well situated for sun once the maple leaf's out. Do you know how to garden? No, I said, but I know how to learn things. She looked at me. Something moved across her face, recognition, maybe. The recognition of a trait she had always known was there but had not fully seen until now. You could have told me, she said softly. Any of it. All those years. You could have told me. I know, I said. Why didn't you? I thought about the real answer, the full answer. The one that included the fear and the habit and the particular loneliness of having built something magnificent in silence and not knowing how to bring it into the light without breaking whatever it was the silence had been protecting. I thought about all the years of library books and early mornings and choosing Robert's comfort over my own full expression. I thought about the girl I had been at 23, starting with $800 and a conviction that understanding was available to her if she was willing to do the work. Because I was afraid, I said. And then because the hiding became a habit. And then because I confused the habit with protection. I met her eyes. Those were my mistakes. I'm not pretending they weren't. Madison looked down at her mug. We both made mistakes, she said. Yes, I said, we did. Are we going to be okay? I took a breath. I thought about the word okay, what it actually meant, what it actually required, how long it actually took to become true after something had been broken. We're going to be something, I said. It's going to take work and time and more conversations like this one, probably harder ones. It's not going to be smooth, and it's not going to be simple, and there are going to be moments when it feels like it's not worth it. I paused. But I believe you love me, and you know I love you. And I think that's enough to build from, if we're both willing to do it honestly this time. She nodded. Her eyes were bright, but she didn't cry this time. I was glad of that, not because her crying was wrong, but because this moment deserved something steadier than tears. Honestly this time, she said. Yes. Spring came to Portland the way it always does in that city, not all at once but in increments. A week of warmth, followed by a week of cold, followed by a morning when the Japanese maple in my front yard put out its first small leaves in that particular red-green. That means the thing is alive and has decided to continue. I stood on the porch in my coat, and I watched it happen, and I thought, not for the first time, that trees have the right idea about most things. They don't hurry the season. They just go when they're ready, and they go completely. I had started the garden. Not elegantly, I had made every beginner's mistake there was to make, had planted too close together, and watered inconsistently for the first 3 weeks, and had a conversation with the woman at the garden supply store that I am fairly sure she found both amusing and slightly alarming in its intensity. But the tomatoes were in the ground. The herbs were in pots on the back porch. The garden bed that someone else had let go brown and abandoned was producing green things, tentatively in the pale spring light. Derek came to my door on a Saturday morning in April. He came alone. He did not call ahead Or he had told Madison he wasn't going to, because he knew himself well enough to know he would talk himself out of it if he allowed himself time to think too carefully. He rang the doorbell, and when I opened it, he was standing on the porch with his hands in his jacket pockets and an expression that I can only describe as stripped, the careful composure entirely absent, replaced by something that looked like a man who has spent 5 months sitting with something uncomfortable and has decided the discomfort of avoidance is worse than the discomfort of facing it. "I owe you a real apology," he said. "Not I wanted to apologize, not I hope you don't mind me coming by. Direct. The directness of someone who has practiced this and decided that directness was the only version that would be honest." "Come in," I said. He came in and stood in my living room and looked around the way Madison had at the desk, the books, the chair with the reading lamp, and I saw in his face the same complicated recognition, the life that existed because of harm. He sat on the couch, and I sat in my chair, and I gave him nothing to hold on to. No reassurance, no preemptive ease not from cruelty, but because he had asked for an honest conversation, and an honest conversation requires both people to be present for it without cushioning. "The phone call to your attorney," he said. "That was I want to explain it, but I'm aware that explaining it risks turning it into an excuse, and it wasn't okay regardless of the explanation." "I'll hear the explanation," I said, "and I'll decide for myself whether it's an excuse." He nodded. He looked at his hands for a moment. "We were in a bad place financially. Are in a bad place still, though it's better than it was. The company restructured again last year, and my position changed, and there were months where I was looking at the numbers and not sleeping, and telling Madison everything was fine, because I didn't know how to tell her it wasn't." He paused. "When she found your documents, I think I saw a door that might solve a problem. And I walked through it before I thought about what I was doing, about what it meant, about who I was walking through it toward." He looked up at me. "You were not a problem to be solved. You were Madison's mother. You were sleeping in our laundry room. And I treated you like a balance sheet entry, and I am genuinely, specifically sorry for that." I looked at him for a long moment. The man across from me was not the man I had watched calculate behind his neutral expressions for 6 weeks. Or more accurately, he was that man. But he was also this one. The one sitting in my living room without armor on. And I had meant what I told Madison about holding complexity without resolving it. "The phone call to Harold," I said. "The worst decision I've made in recent memory," he said. "And I've made some poor ones. Madison told me she'd drawn a line, and she meant it, and I agreed with her. I agreed that the line was right. He met my eyes. 'I won't go near it again.' 'No,' I said. 'You won't.' He heard what I meant. He nodded. 'I'm not going to pretend this is repaired,' I said. 'It isn't. Trust is built the way everything real is built, slowly, with consistent material over time. You don't get to buy it back with one honest conversation.' 'I know,' he said. 'But I'm willing to begin,' I said. 'That's what I'm able to offer right now. A beginning.' He nodded again. He looked, for a moment, genuinely relieved, not because he had gotten more than he expected, but because a beginning was real, was concrete, was something he could actually work with. Derek Hale was a man who needed something actionable, and a beginning was that. "Tyler asks about you constantly," he said, and there was something different in his voice when he said it softer, less defended. The voice he used for his son, rather than for managing a situation. "He wants to know if he can come over more. He's got a new game he's been saving to explain to you." "He's welcome any time," I said. That has never changed. Derek stood when I stood. He shook my hand at the door, which was slightly formal, and also, I thought, exactly right, the handshake, of two people who are starting something careful and new, and don't yet have the vocabulary for it. I watched him walk down my porch steps and get in his car. The Japanese maple was fully leafed now, red-green and reaching. The teal chairs sat on either side of the door, exactly the right amount of bold, as Tyler had pronounced them. I stood on the porch for a while after Derek's car turned the corner and disappeared. "There is something I want to say to you directly, now that we are at the end of this. Something I have been circling around for the entire length of this story, and that I think needs to be said plainly, without the wrapper of narrative around it. I am 68 years old. I have been invisible, by choice and by circumstance, for most of my adult life. I built something remarkable in that invisibility. I am not going to pretend otherwise. I am not going to perform false modesty about it, and the building was important, and it protected people I loved, and I do not regret it. but the hiding that went with it, the decades of smallness and silence and self-erasure, dressed up as discretion that I regret. Not so bitterly that it has become the defining thing, but genuinely, with the specific grief of someone who understands what was lost. Here is what I want you to know. Whoever you are, wherever you are watching this from, whatever room you are in right now, your age is not your ceiling. The number of years you have lived is not the evidence against you that the world sometimes tries to make it. I have known women in their 70s who are beginning things actual beginnings, not conclusions dressed up as beginnings, and I have known women in their 30s who had already decided they were finished. The difference was never the years. It was always the decision. The people who put you in the laundry room, whoever yours are, whatever form they took, are not the authority on what you are worth. They are not the final word. They are frightened people who sized you up incorrectly and treated you according to an assessment that was wrong. And the wrongness of their assessment is not your fault and is not your problem to carry. You are allowed to leave the laundry room. You are allowed to close the door on the version of yourself that survived by being small, and to open the door on the version that has been waiting, maybe for years, maybe for decades, to take up the space it was always supposed to take up. You are allowed to choose teal, even if someone told you it was too bold. You are allowed to be known. Not just the manageable version of you, not just the version that fits comfortably inside other people's ideas of what you should be, but the whole thing, the capability and the anger and the grief and the love and the things you built in the quiet margins that nobody bothered to look at because they had already decided they knew what they were looking at. Let them look again. Let them find out they were wrong. That is not revenge, it is simply the truth. And the truth deserves to be visible. The last thing I want to tell you about is something that happened on a Thursday evening in late April at Patricia's house at the investment group meeting that had by then become one of the fixed stars of my week. We had finished the business portion of the evening, reviewed the portfolio, debated two positions Ruth wanted to exit and Sylvia wanted to keep, reached a compromise that satisfied nobody entirely, and was therefore, in my experience, probably the right call, and we had moved into the part of the evening that had evolved organically over the months, the part that was not officially on the agenda, but that happened anyway, the part where we just talked. About our weeks, our families, the things that were sitting on us, the things that were carrying us. Patricia was talking about her daughter in Atlanta, who had recently been promoted to a position that Patricia described with the particular pride of a parent who is trying not to make the conversation entirely about themselves and is not entirely succeeding. Ruth was drinking her second glass of wine, which she limited herself to rigorously, and looking out the window at Patricia's garden, which was coming in beautifully because Ruth had given Patricia the same speech about the maple that Patricia had given me. Sylvia had her feet tucked up under herself on the couch in the way she always sat when she was comfortable, which I had come to think of as the highest compliment she paid a space. And I was sitting in the chair by the window, in a room that was warm and smelled like coffee, and the chicken stew Patricia had made, among three women who had become in the quiet, undramatic way that real things become my people, not replacements for Madison or Tyler or the complicated ongoing work of family. Something alongside all of that. My own chosen, completely mine. Patricia said something funny about her daughter's new boss, and Ruth said something drier in response, and Sylvia laughed. And I laughed too. And it was the real kind, the kind that doesn't have any performance in it, that comes from being genuinely present in a room with people you genuinely like. I want to hold that moment for you because I think it is the truest ending to this story. Not the confrontation in the kitchen, as necessary as that was. Not the restructured trust or the painted chairs or even the conversation with Madison over tea. Those were important. Those were the architecture of the new life. But this room, this Thursday evening, this laughter, with these women who had known me for less than a year and already knew me more completely than some people I had known for decades. This was what the architecture was built to house. This was what all of it had been for. The woman who had slept on a laundry room cot for 6 weeks was sitting in a warm room on a Thursday evening, laughing with people who knew her actual name. Not the manageable version, not the invisible version, not the widow or the burden or the woman who should be grateful for a place to sleep. Just Evelyn, the whole one. I had come a long way to get here. I had come through loss and silence and betrayal, and the specific, grinding indignity of being treated as less than I was by the person I had given the most to. I had come through the anger and the grief and the 2 in the morning hours when the darkness had a weight to it that pressed down on everything. And I had arrived. Not at perfect, I want to be clear that I had not arrived at perfect. That perfect is not a place that exists. That anyone who tells you the ending of a real story is perfect is either lying or describing something that didn't happen to an actual human being. I had arrived at mine. At a life I had chosen and built and inhabited with my whole self, with nothing hidden, nothing apologized for, nothing smaller than it actually was. The Japanese maple in my front yard was fully leafed by then, red-green and reaching. The tomatoes in the garden bed were putting out their first real growth. The teal chairs on the porch held the late afternoon sun and glowed with it, unapologetically. And Evelyn Carter, 68 years old, widow, investor, volunteer, neighbor, grandmother-mother, and at last, entirely herself was not finished. She was, in every way that mattered, just beginning.